Anchor. You can support us with the Super Thanks button below.
War is one of the worst events in the world. As a result of every war, people die and there is a lot of suffering. No one wants more suffering. But why do soldiers fight? To participate in a war, soldiers must think that it is really necessary and justified. Soldiers are always very brave when they fight to save innocent lives and protect their country. But what happens when soldiers are not motivated enough to fight? Recent developments in the Russian army have allowed this question to be answered for the first time. The war between Russia and Ukraine has been in many ways the most interesting war in the world. The only army where soldiers are so reluctant to fight is the Russian army. This reluctance of Russian soldiers is completely changing the course of the war. Especially the things that Russian soldiers have done in the last days have made Putin desperate. We have examined the causes and consequences of what is happening in the Russian army, with reports prepared by many experts, and compiled this information for you. Let's start if you're ready. Everyone knows that the majority of the Russian people do not support this war. Polls conducted in Russia reveal striking facts on this issue. According to the latest polls in Russia, 67% of Russian citizens want peace talks with Ukraine to start as soon as possible. After these poll results were shared, Putin took an interesting decision. Putin banned the sharing of poll results with the public in Russia and imposed restrictions on polls, because he wants to influence and manipulate the thoughts of the Russian people. To this end, he constantly encourages the sharing of fake news through the media and provokes the public. However, despite his efforts, the vast majority of the Russian people do not believe these lies. This is also affecting the Russian army. A significant number of soldiers in the Russian army were recruited after the war started. They all knew that this war was only for Putin's political career. That's why Russian soldiers were very reluctant to fight. They wanted this war to end as soon as possible, but this demand of the Russian soldiers was ignored by Kremlin. Kremlin leaders insisted that the war should continue for a long time. This only exacerbated the problem between the Russian soldiers and Kremlin, because the more the war intensified, the more Russian soldiers died. Russian soldiers blamed Kremlin when they witnessed the death of their friends. After the recent operations, the problems of the Russian soldiers have increased even more. As a result of the successful operations of the Ukrainian army, the Russian army suffered a heavy defeat. According to data released by the Ukrainian Defense Ministry, more than 170,000 soldiers have died in the Russian army since the beginning of the war. This number is increasing rapidly every day. The number of injured Russian soldiers cannot be calculated precisely. There is information that there are many problems in the Russian army hospitals. According to reports in the Russian press, there are many problems in the treatment of wounded Russian soldiers. Since the number of wounded soldiers is too high, the number of doctors in hospitals is insufficient. There are also not enough beds and food for wounded Russian soldiers. Russian soldiers who have difficulty in getting treatment are very angry because of these problems. Another problem in the Russian army is the ammunition crisis. The Ukrainian army continues to carry out operations against Russian ammunition depots. Finally, in the explosion at the Zhankoy military base in Crimea, a large number of ammunition of the Russian army was destroyed. Many Russian soldiers do not even have armor. Russian soldiers use very old weapons and have no security measures. The weapons used by Russian soldiers often break down, and this makes Russian soldiers more unsuccessful in combat. They know that they cannot win the war under these conditions. That is why the soldiers want to leave the army. There is another reason why soldiers want to leave the army as well. A significant part of Russian soldiers think that this war is an occupation. These soldiers do not want to participate in operations against the Ukrainian people. This opinion of Russian soldiers affects the course of the war. Russian soldiers are contacting the Ukrainian government to leave the army. As you know, the Ukrainian government has set up a hotline called I Want to Leave. Thanks to this hotline, thousands of Russian soldiers have contacted Ukrainian authorities. After these meetings, Russian soldiers surrendered to the Ukrainian army. It is known that this line has been called at least 10,000 times so far. However, the information on how many Russian soldiers surrendered in total is kept a secret. This way, it is planned to ensure the security of the surrendered Russian soldiers. Surrendered Russian soldiers pose a big problem for Putin. Because all of these soldiers have a great anger against him, the surrendered Russian soldiers are ready to do anything to harm Putin's regime. Surrendered Russian soldiers are doing things that will change the course of the war. But how are these soldiers doing it? Russian soldiers learn a lot of critical information before they surrender. This information leads to the deciphering of many of the Russian army's war plans. The Ukrainian army makes use of this information. First, a hot meal and a comfortable bed are prepared for the surrendered Russian soldiers. After resting, the soldiers are allowed to meet their families. Then, they are interrogated. Russian soldiers tell everything they knew during this interrogation. So, what is this information? The coordinates of ammunition depots are among the most secret information of the Russian army. After the successful operations of the Ukrainian army, Russia changed the location of its ammunition depots. The location of all ammunition depots is hidden. This way, it is aimed to prevent the Ukrainian army from destroying these depots. However, the surrendered Russian soldiers share the coordinates of these depots with the Ukrainian army. This is how the Ukrainian army managed to destroy the ammunition depots. There is another secret information for the Russian army. The number of soldiers in the Russian army is quite insufficient. The Ukrainian army is conducting operations in areas where Russia is militarily weak. This way, many regions are liberated. The Russian army is constantly lying about the number of soldiers on the battlefield. The surrendered Russian soldiers tell how many Russian soldiers are in their unit and other details about the structure of the unit. The secrets of the Russian army are being exposed. Putin is furious at the surrendered Russian soldiers, but he cannot do anything against them. It is estimated that if more Russian soldiers leave the army, Putin's political career will be severely disrupted. According to experts, this could spell the end of him. He is in a very difficult political situation. Putin, who wants to maintain his political power, started to meet with Russian soldiers all the time. This way, he wants to keep the soldiers' motivation and willingness to fight high. But Russian soldiers are extremely angry with him. The tension between Russian soldiers and Putin is affecting the outcome of this war. This tension is a big problem for the Ukrainian army. What do you think about the crisis in the Russian army? Do you think Russian soldiers will continue to surrender? Do you support the surrender of Russian soldiers? What else do you think the Ukrainian government should do to encourage the surrender of Russian soldiers? We are interested in your opinions. Follow us for more updates.
All rights to these videos belong to Anka Daily News YouTube channel. Our Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook usernames are @AnkaDailyNews. Do not rely on any other social media publications. We legally fight all websites and channels that use it without our permission.